Spoilers for Final Fantasy XIV up through the end of Endwalker. In the second episode of the 5th season of the sitcom Community, Introduction to Teaching, aspiring filmmaker Abed Nadir takes a film class called Nicolas Cage, Good or Bad. This episode aired before the Nicolas Cage renaissance we've seen over the past few years, with films like Mandy, The Color Out of Space, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and of course, Willy's Wonderland, masterpieces all. So it was a time when Nick Cage was mostly associated, at least in his recent career, with schlock. You were getting a lot of Ghost Rider, a lot of Knowing, a lot of Left Behind. The premise of the class Abed takes is that the question itself is unanswerable. Nicolas Cage, Good or Bad, is simply not a question which can be answered easily, like who's the boss can be. It is unknowable. Abed rejects this notion, saying that all actors are something, and is determined to find proof within Nick Cage's career that will, once and for all, settle whether Nick Cage is good or bad. When you stare into the abyss, however, the abyss tends to stare back at you. And as Abed dives deeper and deeper into the question of Nicolas Cage, good or bad, it consumes him. For every bad lieutenant port of call New Orleans, there's a Next. For every Con Air, there's a Wicker Man. For every face-off, there's a Spirit of Vengeance. The answer to this question, Nicolas Cage, good or bad, is unknowable. The mind of man truly cannot grasp it. Like all eldritch truths, the closer you draw to it, the more it will inevitably cost you your sanity, your reason. By the end of the episode, Abed loses himself to his inner Cage in a spectacular display in front of the entire class. Truly, grappling with this question, attempting to answer whether Nicolas Cage is a good actor who makes bad movies or a bad actor who makes good movies, has brought him to madness. Anyway, I'm not sure why I brought this up. On an entirely unrelated note, Zenos yae Galvus, good or bad? There is no character in Final Fantasy XIV more divisive than Zenos yae Galvus, the Crown Prince of Garlemald. Serving as the main villain of Stormblood, and teased as the false main villain of Endwalker, Zenos has arguably been the most prevalent villain of Final Fantasy XIV thus far. You don't have to look too hard to find people who love Zenos, his style, his brand of villainy. On the other hand, you don't have to look too hard to find people who hate Zenos with a burning passion, either. He is often listed as one of Final Fantasy XIV's best characters, and equally often listed as one of Final Fantasy XIV's worst characters. That's interesting, isn't it? There's something about this character that inspires strong feelings one way or the other. He's the poster child for love him or hate him. It's easy to write off the controversial nature of the character as simply being a result of how much natural tolerance your body has built up to anime poisoning, but I think there's more going on than just that. This is the third of these videos I've done regarding Final Fantasy XIV, and writing this one, it feels quite different. I think the story of Garlemald and the story of Fandaniel both have strong, coherent themes running throughout them. But I find it a little bit harder to tease out what the theme of Zenos' character is. That's not to say that Zenos' story is devoid of themes, just that what it's saying is, in my opinion, a bit messier than either of those stories. A bit more scattered. Final Fantasy XIV is a collection of dozens of stories, dozens of narrative threads intertwined and overlapping into a complicated world. That's one of its greatest strengths, because that makes its world feel real. You can't talk about any one element of FF14's story without tangentially talking about half a dozen other things, because that's just how this world works. Every individual actor has their own motivations, their own politics, and their own goals, and those are in conflict with the motivations, politics, and goals of everyone else. What makes Zenos feel so different from the other characters in Final Fantasy XIV, then, and what I think makes people view him as out of place, is his simplicity. Zenos is not a complicated person. Zenos wants only one thing: to brilliantly burn through the candle of his life in mortal combat, and nothing else matters to him. He's not politically motivated, despite being a figure of great political power. He doesn't have a specific goal like Emet-Selch or Fandaniel do. His job will never be done because there is no finite ending in mind. He's not a schemer, he's not a mastermind. Emet-Selch is a scalpel, Zenos is a sledgehammer. I like to think of these videos as, first and foremost, a way to collect and work through my own thoughts on the complicated narrative of Final Fantasy XIV, by grabbing one of these narrative threads and pulling on it until I reach some point of satisfaction, that I know what that story is trying to say. When I talked about Garlemald, that meant discussing the history of Garlemald's rise, the different flawed leaders of the nation, and its ultimate fall. When I talked about Fandaniel, that meant talking about the distinct individuals who held that title, and the way their actions intersected. Zenos, though, is perhaps the most tangled and confused thread in the entire story, so the way I want to talk about Zenos in this video is a little different. I hate Zenos. He's a one-dimensional character without the interesting, complex motivations that drive the other antagonists in the world. At the same time, I love Zenos, because that simplicity gives him a fascinating relationship to the other players in the world. So in this video, I'm going to sort through my own messy feelings about a messy character, examine all the good and all the bad of Zenos, how the character has changed over his arc, as well as asking if he even changed, even had an arc at all. I've got this video split into two sections: an anti-Zenos section about why I hate him, and a pro-Zenos section about why I love him. Something you're going to notice, and I don't think there's a way around it, is that the pro-Zenos section is significantly longer than the anti-Zenos section. Is that because Zenos is more good than bad, that I love the character far more than I hate him? No, it's not. It's because the reasons why Zenos are bad are very clear. They are very self-evident. I don't need to spend as much time explaining them because they are simple. They are obvious critical flaws. The reasons I like Zenos are much more complicated. They take a lot more justification. They take a lot more time to explain. That in itself is another one of Zenos' flaws. The fact that the video is structured this way is another point against him, as far as I'm concerned. It's not that the reasons I like Zenos are any less genuine than the reasons I hate him. I really do like the things I like a lot. It's just that the things about this story which are successful take a lot more unpacking than the things about this story which are unsuccessful. If the reasons you like something take more time to explain than the reasons you hate something, that's kind of a knock against it all on its own. I think the story of Garlemald was an unqualified win. I think the story of Fandaniel was an unqualified win. Zenos is a character who, at best, I would call a very, very qualified win. The point of this exercise, this video, like all of my videos, is to organize my thoughts on the character and iron out what I think the writers of Final Fantasy XIV were trying to say. I want to untangle this messy narrative for my own selfish Final Fantasy XIV enjoying reasons. I don't have a single concrete thesis for this video, because I think Zenos' story is too messy to be about any one thing. But that's not the same thing as being about nothing, and that doesn't mean it's not worth examining. Without further ado, let's talk about the Crown Prince of Garlemald.
Majestic mountains
A lot of people just don't like Zenos because he's a broody Bishonen boy. But that's not going to be a criticism I level at the character. That's not the direction I'm coming from at all. It's fine to not like the trope, and if that's really the beginning and end of why you don't like the character, then it's a fine enough reason to not like him. It's a matter of personal taste. I, however, love a broody Bishonen boy. This is a trope that works just fine for me. If anything, I'm predisposed to liking him because he's a broody Bishonen boy. The problem with Zenos comes down not to presentation, but motivation and execution. One of the things I find draws me to Final Fantasy XIV is how it doesn't feel like it's indulging in the typical tropes of JRPGs, of anime, and of MMOs for their own sake. Often, characters will be introduced as an archetype, but will quickly evolve into something much more complicated and much more unique. The characters, especially the villains of Final Fantasy XIV, feel so compelling because you get to learn about the complicated inner worlds of each. I've talked a lot about villains on this channel already, but to lightning round through some of my favorite examples of this, Gaius Van Baelsar could have just been a powerful Garlean general you fight in A Realm Reborn, but instead, they tell a pretty unique story of a true believer in his nation who has a crisis of faith in that nation when he realizes the values he thought they stood for were merely propaganda. Emmett Selk's dry wit, and the way he acts as though he's always the smartest man in the room, could have made him a cliché and one-dimensional character. But instead, through both excellent writing and performance, they convey a profound loneliness behind his words. He is a man who only seeks to bring back his loved ones and the world he knew. Truly the hero of a different story. Even Fandaniel's desire to end all life, the most supervillain motivation there is, ends up justified through a story that examines the philosophy of why we endure through lives filled with suffering, and sympathizes with those who no longer wish to continue through pain. Nidhogg, Ardbert, Lady Iceheart, Nero, Yotsuyu, the list of characters introduced as simple villains who have something deeper and more complicated driving their motivations goes on and on. Zenos, though, really is a what you see is what you get type of character. Zenos yae Galvus wants to be stronger and to test himself against more powerful foes. That's it. That's his motivation. In a game which offers so many characters that feel like some of the most nuanced villains in not only the MMORPG genre, but in video games overall, is it any wonder that Zenos' extremely simple motivations led to many being confused and off-put by the character? He's a spoiled brat. He's in a position of political power and knows it, but seemingly has no interest whatsoever in using that political power to further any agenda, good or bad. He is a rich, powerful person giving in to his hedonistic pleasures, specifically his lust for combat. Zenos does not have a complex philosophy, and seems to be disgusted by anyone who does, which makes him an anomaly in a game where every other actor is very coherently motivated by their own politics and philosophy. He's a weird fit for this game, let alone to serve as the main villain of an expansion or two. What's especially weird is that Zenos functions as the primary antagonist of Stormblood specifically. Stormblood is easily the most politically involved expansion that Final Fantasy XIV has ever had. This is the expansion where you are standing against Garlemald, where you get to see the way it mistreats the people under its subjugation and convince them to fight back against that. This would have been the chance to give us another Gaius Van Baelsar, or someone like Varus or Quintus von Kina. Political movers and shakers with, in their eyes, justified political motivations. With the exception of Zenos, we rarely get to see how those in power in Garlemald interact with the subjugated people of Garabania or Doma. Our biggest villain in the Garabanian arc is Fordola, a Garabanian, and our biggest villain in Doma is Yotsuyu, a Doman. Zenos' interactions with both of these characters are interesting, and we'll go into them later, but they don't have much of that political intrigue Game of Thrones appeal, because Zenos is not politically motivated. That puts this weird wrench in the gears of Stormblood as a story, and makes it fall a little flat in the end. You're spending all of your time throughout the expansion making these political moves, and moving these pieces around a chessboard, only for your final confrontation to not resonate with these themes at all. Consider how Endwalker constantly builds upon themes of nihilism and finding meaning through suffering, and how the final boss of Endwalker is Medeon, the Endsinger, who is an avatar of that nihilism, of that theme. It means that the story up to that point, and the final boss you face, are in thematic harmony. Truly great stories need that, need the climax to feel thematically relevant to the themes of the story up to that point. Throughout Stormblood, though, Zenos just kind of shows up periodically to fight you, grinding the actual themes of the expansion to a halt. At the end, a story about politics climaxes by fighting someone who does not care about politics. This would feel more appropriate if this were to demonstrate how those in power are only using politics as a shield for their own selfish interests, but that's not the case. Zenos is an anomaly within the Empire. While Varus, the Emperor, has sinister and secret motivations, he is still very concerned with politics and believes in what he is fighting for. He believes what he is doing is for the good of his people. It's not just that his motivations are lacking, though. That alone could have been fine. It's that the game itself treats Zenos uncritically as this next-level badass, more powerful than anyone else you've met in the game so far, in a way that feels incredibly unearned. One of the most frustrating aspects of Zenos is how he's introduced. Before we meet Zenos face-to-face, we do get a few cutscenes with him, which establish him as a villain. I do particularly like their version of the killing your own minion trope for a villain introduction, because Zenos makes it very clear that he's killing this commander for cowardice. This commander did not lead his troops into battle, and only one of those troops returned. It's clear that the Garlean soldiers expect that if anyone will be punished for cowardice, it's the one survivor of the encounter who ran away. But what Zenos finds far more off-putting is the idea of a commander choosing to hide within a fortress while his men find glory in combat. In Zenos' eyes, there is no reason for such a commander to keep living. Aside from that, though, there's not much build-up for Zenos before we encounter him. And when we do encounter him, he wipes the floor with us. This is one of those mandatory defeat encounters, which are often used to illustrate how much stronger an enemy is than the player. I don't mind these when used well, but they're very hard to pull off well in an MMO, because the player knows how powerful they've become, so you have to really work for it to make the defeat feel earned. They do these a few times with Zenos, and each time you get progressively closer to taking him down, which begs the question of why? Aside from the answer being because you're level 65 instead of 63, or because you're level 70 instead of 65, I don't really have much of an answer for why, or what's changed between these Zenos encounters. The story of the expansion isn't some kind of training arc for the main character. Thank God, inciting rebellions in Doma and Garabania is much more interesting than that would be. So I don't really know why, narratively, you're able to defeat Zenos at the end of the expansion when you couldn't at the beginning. A much better execution of this trope can actually be found in World of Warcraft. specifically the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. By the time we got to Wrath of the Lich King, Arthas, the titular Lich King, had been a fan favorite villain for years, so anticipation to see him was high. He's still my favorite Warcraft villain by a lot, because they didn't just rest on their laurels knowing that players were already excited to face the Lich King. The entire expansion focuses on Arthas, and you see him appear many times. Most notably at the Wrathgate, where it seems he planned to wipe out the combined forces of an Alliance and Horde army as he joins the fight, until Putris ambushes both sides of the conflict. The forces of the Alliance and Horde suffer many defeats at the hand of the Lich King throughout the entire expansion. Whenever Arthas shows up, though, there's a real sense of him being on an entirely different level from the player, that the player holds no hope of overcoming him. This idea was expanded on in the dungeon added in patch 3.4, Halls of Reflection. The final quote-unquote boss fight of that dungeon is Arthas, but as this is only a 5-person dungeon and not a full raid, you don't have a hope of facing him. When Arthas discovers you, this fight becomes a chase sequence, as you have to escape Arthas, and if he reaches you, then it's a wipe. By the time you face Arthas at the end of Icecrown Citadel, with either 9 or 24 other players standing beside you, it feels incredibly earned, and it feels like you still wouldn't hold a candle to him without those allies alongside you. Even once you do defeat the boss fight, you still don't actually have a chance against Arthas. It turns out the entire expansion, everything you have done, has all been a part of his plan. He worked, mercilessly, through the Alliance and Horde forces until only their very strongest champions stood before him. Specifically, so he could take those champions and turn them into his own undead warriors. He kills the entire raid, and if it weren't for the intervention of Tyrion using the Ashbringer, as well as the ghost of Arthas' father, you would still lose. This is the kind of climactic build-up the story of Zenos needed if it was going to work. When Arthas wipes the floor with the player in Halls of Reflection, it feels earned. This is someone who can single-handedly fight an entire army. What hope would you, even as one of Azeroth's champions, have against him? When you finally manage to defeat Arthas at the end of Icecrown, there are clear reasons why it works. You're there with the other most powerful champions of Azeroth, including High Lord Tyrion Fordring wielding the Purified Ashbringer, a legendary enchanted sword, and Arthas' own father breaks free of Frostmourne and turns against him. With Zenos, it's just weirdly gamey. Zenos showing up and being so much more powerful than Nidhogg, than the bosses of the Alexander raid, than so many primals you've fought before, doesn't feel like it's justified. Yes, you are fighting him with friends at your side in the Alamigo and Royal Menagerie boss fights, but Zenos' dialogue still treats it like you've overcome him on your own merits. And in the earlier encounters, you're fighting him alongside characters like the Scions or Yugiri. When you do finally beat him, it feels like it's only because you've literally leveled up. That's just not narratively satisfying. Now, this isn't to say World of Warcraft has better storytelling than Final Fantasy XIV does overall. It definitely doesn't. I'm comparing the best story Warcraft ever told to one of, in my opinion, the weakest moments in all of Final Fantasy XIV. It's worth comparing these two, though, because I think it illustrates how Zenos could have been better built up. Really, though, my biggest issue with Zenos, and what I think is the primary cause for people hating this character so much, is the number of times you fight him. Okay, so Zenos only dies twice in Final Fantasy XIV. So far, at least. He dies at the end of Stormblood by his own hand, and then again at the end of Endwalker after he finally gets his rematch with you. So he dies once each at the end of the 2 expansions he's an antagonist in. That's fine. He really only actually, honest to God, got brought back to life once. It's a fantasy game. I read the X-Men comics, so I'm not allowed to complain about that. Why then does it feel like I've killed him so many times? Like he's the Ansem of this game. Because you fight Zenos, and they tease fights with Zenos a lot. A lot. How many times, you ask? Well, here's my count. Fight number 1, the Rhalgr's Reach fight. You have to lose. Zenos shows up with Garlean forces at Rhalgr's Reach, beats your allies, and then beats you. He lets you live so he can have a rematch. Great. Fight number 2, in the Time Between the Seconds quest in Doma. Yugiri ambushes Zenos, gets curb stomped, then you rematch him. Again, he lets you live. Fight number 3, Al Amigo. Zenos is the final boss fight of the dungeon. After you defeat him, he leaves to rematch you a few minutes later in... Fight number 4, the Royal Menagerie. Zenos merges himself with Shinryu, becoming a primal in order to fight us as the final boss fight of Stormblood. When we finally defeat him as Shinryu, he dies to his own hand by slashing his throat instead of being taken prisoner. Everyone take a deep breath, that's the end of Zenos. Until resurrection number 1. This is the fake-out, false resurrection when Elidibus takes over Zenos' corpse. This eventually leads to fight number 5. You fight fake Zenos, Elidibus Zenos, as a part of the quest A Requiem for Heroes. He's more powerful than he used to be because he's actually Elidibus now. That's fine, that makes sense, no problems here. Things start to get goofy when... Resurrection number 2! It turns out Zenos' soul has just been free floating around. And because he's part Ossian, since his great-grandfather was Emet-Selch, or maybe because he augmented himself the same way Fordola was augmented, he's able to take over fallen soldiers. What gets really silly is what I'm going to call Resurrection number 2.5, when Zenos completely overpowers Elidibus, despite Elidibus being one of the few remaining unsundered Ossians and very powerful, and Zenos being mostly dead. His willpower was just so strong that he defeated Elidibus, Zenos gets his original body back, and Elidibus runs away to eventually steal Ardbart's corpse instead. Okay, everyone, deep breath number 2, because now we're in Endwalker. Zenos makes it very clear his only motivation now is to get a rematch with you, and boy do they love teasing it. Tease number 1, when Zenos attacks your friends in your body in Garlemald. It looks like things are going to come to a head, but instead, Zenos and Fandaniel retreat to the moon, so Zenos can become the new core of Zodiark. Tease number 2. Zenos confronts you on the moon just before he's going to become Zodiark. You both draw your weapon, but Fandaniel merges with Zodiark before you can actually fight. After you kill Zodiark, you immediately get tease number 3, where Zenos confronts you again, before saying there would be no point in fighting you right now because your heart isn't in it, so he gives you a rain check. Tease number 4 happens a few hours of gameplay later during the Garlean interlude after the Elpis chapter, just to remind you that there are still Zenoses afoot. Zenos shows up and, once again, confronts you, but Iulis and Alice are having none of his nonsense and bully him until he gets sad and sulks away. Right before the climax of the game, we see Zenos merge back together with Shinryu and head for Ultima Thule. This seems like it's going to lead to a Shinryu rematch, but I'm not going to count it as a tease, because he never directly confronts you in Shinryu form like he's going to attack, so they get away with this one. Finally, the teases are over, and you get fight number 6 as a little cherry on top after the story is over. The two of you expend all your remaining energy in a joyous battle as equals, as friends, and Zenos' story comes to a close. I think that's all of them. Did I miss anything? I wouldn't be surprised if I missed a fight somewhere, and I just rewatched all of Zenos' cutscenes yesterday at the time of writing. With all of that, 6 fights, 4 teases, and 2.5 resurrections, is it any wonder people are fatigued by Zenos? Even if you absolutely love Zenos, it's hard for me to understand or relate to someone who thinks all of these fights are necessary. None of these encounters and repeated plot beats should have been cut. It's repetitive and redundant and repetitive and redundant. I really think a lot of this, as well as a lot of the feeling of Zenos coming out of nowhere, could have been fixed by just cutting some of these encounters and teases. If you'll allow me to Monday morning quarterback the game devs here for a moment, the obvious fix seems to be simply not having the player face Zenos at all until the battle in Alamigo. Still have Zenos show up all the places he does, have those fights play out very similarly, let him beat Lys, let him turn the tide at Rhalgr's Reach, let him stomp Yugiri into the ground, all of that is fine. But then have the Warrior of Light and Zenos keep missing each other. Maybe Zenos starts hearing stories about the Warrior of Light, the greatest warrior in all of the Eorzean Alliance, and starts hunting them. Then, let the boss fight at the end of Alamigo play out just as it does in-game. Then let him get his rematch as Shinryu in the Royal Menagerie. And I think Stormblood, as a whole, would have been so much stronger. I'd let the Elidibus fight stay where it is, and I like the final confrontation with Zenos at the end of Endwalker. Really, those two fights are fine. It's just fighting him 4 times throughout Stormblood already feels draining. And by the time they've brought him back, they already have to grapple with the baggage of the character. So, yeah, Zenos is a bad character. Lay it all out like that, and he's one-dimensional, with an incredibly repetitive and tedious story. It's never going to be interesting to fight the same character, often with the same mechanics, over and over and over again throughout the story. He has to be the worst villain Final Fantasy XIV has ever had. Now, let's talk about why Zenos is a good character, and one of the best villains Final Fantasy XIV has ever had. Part of the problem with the way Zenos is presented in the game is that one of his most defining experiences, the event which set him on the path he would follow for the rest of his life, isn't represented in the game at all. Final Fantasy XIV Chronicles of Light is a short story collection first printed in 2019 and then reprinted in 2022. One of the stories within the collection is titled The Hunt Begins, and tells the story of the first blood Zenos would ever draw. As a young boy, Zenos was already apathetic, the same spoiled princeling he would always be, but without the fervor for combat that would come to define him. The story opens and introduces us to Zenos as follows. One might think it a blessing to be born into the ruling family of a vast and powerful empire, but for the young Prince Zenos, great-grandson of Solus Zeus Galvus, revered founding father of the Garlean Empire, it was a curse. From the beginning, Zenos was alone. His lady mother succumbed to illness shortly after bringing him into the world, and his lord father was seldom present, occupied as he was with his military campaigns and political maneuvering. And while the prince was surrounded by countless servants, they were as machina to him, trundling about on invisible rails, bereft of independent thought. The Crown Prince of Garlemald was naturally gifted. Brilliant, he took to any lessons with an almost supernatural ease, and as a result found his tutors, the brightest minds in Garlemald, tedious and unimpressive. When he was 14, he attended his combat lessons, only to find his usual tutor replaced by a new man, not a Garlean, but one of the natives of their subjugated lands. We see here that, until now, Zenos has found his combat drills as tedious as his academic studies, but that was all about to change. Reading from the story once again, a different tutor, he thought, for the selfsame lesson. Hours of being reminded to grip his sword correctly, of being told to stand this way and that. Combat training was numbingly dull as academic studies, but he had not the will to refuse anymore, if indeed he ever had. Zenos reached out and grasped a practice sword from the rack, and found the hall's cold floor pressed against his face. What in the world? He instinctively tried to regain his feet, but the floor shifted beneath him, and he fell back down. The pain in the back of his skull told him that he had been struck, though he neither saw nor heard his assailant's approach. "You are dead," the foreigner said, as he stood over Zenos, his voice betraying no emotion. He spun on his heels and strode off. "Wait, we haven't even started," Zenos muttered groggily, as he tried again in vain to clamber to his feet. His tutor did not spare him a backward glance. The dead do not learn. They sleep. One might expect the spoiled prince to be angered, outraged at this sort of treatment. Being trained not through lessons, but through combat, as a swordmaster years beyond Zenos in experience grinds him into the ground again and again and again. Instead, though, this makes Zenos feel alive. We see this pulls Zenos out of his apathy and makes him feel alive maybe for the first time ever. Again, reading from the story, the 10th day saw Zenos limping back to his chambers, cradling a throbbing shoulder, when his father's voice rang out behind him. "How goes your training?" As if you don't know. Though his clothing did a good job of hiding the countless welts and bruises now covering his body, Varus would have received the reports from his son's servants. He knew full well about these daily thrashings, and had permitted them to continue. "Very well, father," Zenos replied, smiling. The fact that the story is never represented in the game is kind of baffling, because it is so informative to who Zenos is. He truly views adversity as a gift, both when he is met with a challenge and when he challenges others. He doesn't call you his friend as a taunt, he means it. The only thing that has ever made Zenos feel alive is being met by those equal or greater than he is in combat. And so, in challenging you, he wants to give you that same experience. This story, though, does not end here. It would also show us the first of many times Zenos overcame these challenges with supernatural ease. Zenos found mention of a sword technique called the Unyielding Blade in a text within the royal library. Though scarce few mentions of this technique could be found, Zenos decided it didn't matter, as you can't learn a sword technique from a book anyway, and so he would practice by himself until he had learned the technique. Quote, "Arm yourself," he ordered as Zenos took his place. The boy had improved in recent days, he had to concede, but there were limits that he could never overcome. Even with a willing teacher, he added inwardly. Today would doubtless bring more of the same. He watched as his charge reached out and grasped a practice sword from the rack, and slashed at him without warning. The boy was a good 10 paces away. Short of throwing his sword, he could not hope to reach him. Yet, an instant later, he found himself scrambling to dodge the energy wave that hurtled narrowly past his side. How did you do that?" He could not hide his shock at having his own technique used against him. For the Unyielding Blade was passed down only from master to pupil, and he was the last remaining soul to bear the title of Swordmaster. Zenos using this technique should not have even been a question of practice, of skill. The Unyielding Blade requires the user to manipulate their own ether, to imbue their sword with it. In other words, it requires the use of magic, something which the Garleans are unable to do. It turns out, we see at the end of this story, that Zenos overcame this by embedding an ether crystal into the palm of his hand. The Swordmaster is outraged, insulted to see Zenos use an art that is sacred to him and his native Corvos. Throwing aside any regard for the consequences, he charges Zenos with the intent to kill, only to discover that Zenos has surpassed his own skill in less than a month. Ere long, he found himself backed against a corner, the grip of his sword slick with sweat. So thoroughly overwhelmed, he was forced to admit that Zenos was no pampered prince to be scorned, but a true warrior to be feared. But he would not, could not, admit defeat. "No," he whispered through gritted teeth, Not to you. Not today. With a savage roar, he threw himself at Zenos, bringing his weapon down with every fiber of his being, willing it to strike home. The blade sang as it traced a vicious arc through the air, and fell from limp fingers to the floor with a clang. He looked down to see his lifeblood blossoming upon his chest, dripping from Zenos' hands, still gripping the sword hilt. The dead do not learn. They sleep. Is that not so? Zenos whispered by the Corvosi's ear, but his only response was to collapse to the ground, the sword still lodged in his breast, eyes open but unseeing. What's especially interesting here is that in his moment of victory, we see Zenos at the most empty he's ever been. Looking down at the corpse of his tutor, Zenos thinks, "Battle offers no euphoria, despite what the tales may claim. Deep down, I had always known this, yet I find myself disappointed nonetheless." So the story ends with Zenos returning to bed and silently wishing, praying, to one day meet someone who will actually let him feel the euphoria he's heard of in tales of combat. This is a really well-written short story, maybe the best piece of writing related to Zenos, and incredibly important to our understanding of him, of who he is, of what his motivations are. Zenos is not seeking to be met by an equal. The act of combat itself is not of any interest to Zenos. The only time we ever see Zenos happy is when he's been defeated. He isn't seeking his match in combat, he's seeking someone who surpasses him. It's masochism. This short story wasn't published until 2019, and Stormblood was released in 2017, so this is retroactively making Zenos a more interesting character. It's a retcon, quite literally. Retroactive continuity. Still, I can't help but think that this story, or something like it, should have been how we were first introduced to Zenos, and in-game at that. I wish that this short story had been, like, a legend. Passing it down, the Garleans speaking of it with awe, of how their crown prince surpassed the greatest warrior of Corvos in less than a month, and the people of Garlemald's subjugated nations repeating it with fear. Then, sometime in the post-Heavensward content, or early in Stormblood, have Yugiri or Raoban or Gosetsu tell you this legend before we ever see Zenos. Paint Zenos as this boogeyman of Girabania and Doma, a warrior of unparalleled skill and cruelty. Then, when Zenos shows up, it feels built up to when he curb stomps us. Maybe that's unfair to say. Obviously, if this short story was published in 2019 and Stormblood came out in 2017, they simply hadn't thought of this story yet. But something to this effect was necessary because it would help explain how the people of Garlemald and her subjugated nations understand the prince. There are those among the Garleans, and especially their subjugated people, who are loyal to Zenos, though. Passionately loyal, willing to die for him. At first glance, that seems absurd, like bad writing. Why would anyone be loyal to Zenos, especially when Zenos himself seems indifferent to them? But let's zoom in on two of these relationships Zenos has with his subjects, specifically Zenos' relationship to Asahi and Fordola. Zenos is introduced to us in Stormblood with all of the pomp and circumstance we might expect for the crown prince of such a nationalistic people as the Garleans are. We see him arrive in an airship to the royal palace at El Amigo, with hundreds of soldiers saluting and an anthem playing as he walks to the throne. As a brief tangent, this isn't actually a Zenos thing, it's a general Garlemald thing, but I love that we hear two versions of this anthem. The Garlean version here, and then the original Girabanian one at the end of the expansion, when it's finally been liberated. It's an absolutely masterful way of illustrating how Garlemald subjugates a nation and perverts its culture and heritage. This cutscene of Zenos on the throne is where we see him kill the commander of those troops who were wiped out, but after this, we also see his first interaction with Fordola. Fordola is a Girbanian native, but one who has fully assimilated into Garlemald and the Garlean military, at least as fully as Garlemald will allow. We see full well the way in which Fordola is treated as a second-class citizen by the Garleans, even though she has chosen to betray her own people for them. What's notable, though, is that Fordola is not treated this way by Zenos.
My lord, I have a proposal.
Silence, Alamegan! You do forget yourself! Only by the grace of Lord Van Baelsar were you afforded a place here, and that in name alone. We have no need of your proposals, savage.
This savage yearns to hunt her own. The floor is yours, Commander.
Thank you, my lord.
Zenos, for all of his faults, and let's be clear, he's a monster, does not hold the same prejudices the rest of his people have. I like Zenos' introduction here and his interaction with Fordola. His relationship with Fordola actually explains why he inspires any measure of loyalty among his troops. He doesn't have the prejudices of the other Garleans. He treats her better than anyone else we see her interact with. The character most loyal to Zenos of all, though, is Asahi Sas Brutus. Much like Fordola, he has forsaken his kin in order to cooperate with the Garleans. He's still a second-class citizen, but one in a position of relative power. We see why he is so loyal to Zenos, as Zenos saved his life years earlier. Asahi is also a demonstration of why Zenos does not deserve this loyalty, as Zenos seems completely and utterly indifferent to him, even granting the power of governor of Doma to his sister Yotsuyu instead of him. Asahi is in love with Zenos. He says as much.
It should have been mine. The power he bestowed upon her. I should have been the one to govern Doma. I would have repaid his faith. No one alive loves him more than I!
We later see Asahi manipulated by Elidibus in Zenos' body due to this. Plus, as I mentioned in my Fandaniel video, we later see Asahi in the afterlife, where we see him angrily confront Amon, not because he stole Asahi's corpse, or because he is trying to usher in oblivion, but simply because he betrayed Zenos. Asahi is not my favorite character in the game. I feel like why he's so passionately loyal to Zenos isn't justified even as much as Fordola is, but I think that's somewhat intentional. Asahi is a tragic figure, pledging himself and ultimately sacrificing himself for someone who couldn't care less about him. Although Zenos does not hold prejudice against the people of the subjugated nations the way most Garleans do, this isn't to say he respects them. Rather, he views them the same way he views the Garleans, the way he views almost everyone, as insignificant annoyances. One of the best moments to illustrate his ruthlessness and how detached he is from his subjects is this interaction he has with Yotsuyu.
Do you understand why I appointed you to act in my stead? You, whose only accomplishment was to whisper the right words in the right ear. Because of your petty hatreds. They render you the perfect instrument to bleed your kinsman of hope, to make an example of Doma, such as was ordered.
It's interesting, then, that the one character we do see him hold any sort of respect for, who he seems to have even the slightest connection to, aside from the Warrior of Light, is Fordola. Fordola does not try to get into Zenos' good graces with fealty like Asahi or Yotsuyu do. Rather, she earns his good graces by yearning to fight, and by holding hatred in her heart. When Fordola ultimately fails in her duties, she is called before Zenos. You hear some Garleans say that she is sure to meet her end from him, and even imply that she has ascended to Zenos' good graces by becoming his mistress. But much like Zenos did not have any interest in killing the Garlean soldier who escaped you towards the beginning of Stormblood, but rather the commander who stood in cowardice, he does not choose to kill Fordola for her failure. Why would he, after all? It is, in some sense, a failure which he seeks. Fordola gave her all, and was still defeated, something Zenos cannot say at this point in the story. I think Zenos sees something of himself in Fordola's burning passion, and hatred, and lust for combat. There is a connection there, and Zenos knows just how to stoke those flames of hatred, and bring out Fordola's worst self.
Why do you tremble so? Could it be that the Empire's butcher is afraid? That she who walks with death is terrified of her own?
I'm terrified of dying having achieved naught. Gladly would I give my life to win a great victory on the battlefield, had I but the strength.
Alas, you do not. Indeed, you are weak. And born of this weakness is a blind fervor, a raging inferno which threatens to consume not only you, but everyone around you.
Yes, my lord.
You were defeated by the Resistance on several occasions. You misjudged the Ananta and spurred them into summoning an icon. Have you anything to say?
I do not, my lord. My failures are my own. I am prepared to accept your judgment.
And that is very admirable. However, I've had enough of this dumb show. Give voice to that hunger I see in your eyes, or I will pluck them from your head.
I want... I want to make them pay! All of them! Everyone who ever mocked or looked down on me! I want the power to make them pay!
Very well.
Zenos is manipulating Fordola here. He will give her the power she seeks, but to do so, Fordola will have to truly give herself over to the Empire. Her very body will be altered, perverted through the dark science of Aulus Mal-Asina, who uses Allegan tech to augment and change Fordola's physical being. The reason Zenos does this is because he wants to augment himself in this way. Fordola is a human experiment. She's a guinea pig. More to the point, this process of augmentation, which artificially replicates the echo which gives the Warrior of Light their power, requires the sacrifice of many human lives in order to pull it off. It is a very sinister thing. Fordola is not better off for her association with Zenos. He has brought out her worst self. Yes, the procedure works, and makes Fordola more powerful than she was before, but she would ultimately come to regret it, and the lives sacrificed would haunt her. This process is also the reason why Zenos is ultimately able to do so many things which other characters cannot. It's not spelled out explicitly, but this resonance, this artificial imitation of the echo, is likely why he is able to overpower Elidibus and reclaim his own body. It is a multiplier of someone's natural ability, making Fordola, someone of natural talent, into a super soldier, and turning Zenos, who is almost supernaturally gifted, into a demigod. While Zenos is not doing this for Fordola altruistically, I cannot help but think that he does see this process as a gift. We know that Zenos sees mortal combat, helping someone overcome their natural limits on the field of battle, as a gift. He says as much in our final confrontation with him.
I need burn through the candle of my life. This is the sole pleasure I know, and it is the sole pleasure I have to share.
Fordola, even with the resonance, would not be able to face Zenos in combat, but by augmenting her, by granting her the power she needs to, as she says, give her life for a great victory on the battlefield, isn't he granting her that gift? To burn through the candle of her life? It's also very much worth examining how granting Fordola these powers, this gift, is in conflict with what one might expect from the goals of a Garlean national. Recall what Fordola said when Zenos coaxed the anger out of her. Everyone who ever mocked her or looked down on her. Who does that sound like? Her Girabanian kin, who despise her for siding with the Empire, or the Garleans themselves, who speak of her like this?
Ah, the savage returns, and with her tail firmly between her legs, beaten by beastmen, I hear.
She's just another plodding bungler like the rest of her kind.
Strange, you would think him a better judge of character. Then again, I hear she's not averse to a more physical mode of persuasion.
This conversation happens in the same cutscene where Fordola has her outburst of rage. The game intends for us to know full well that she harbors resentment for Garlemald, just like the rebels do. Zenos is a lot of things, but stupid is not one of them. He is fully aware that giving Fordola this kind of power could, and probably would if she'd been allowed to continue, backfire against Garlemald in the long run. He simply doesn't care. This is one of my favorite things about Zenos. His motivations are simple, they are pure, and they are not political, which on its own is not all that interesting. What is interesting, though, is how those around him seem to constantly fail to realize this. Surely, everyone seems to assume, he must have a political agenda. He is the Crown Prince of Garlemald, second in power only to Emperor Varus himself. Yet, consistently, he doesn't. And in a game where every other actor is politically motivated, having this one loose cannon in the mix cuts through so much of those politics in completely unexpected ways. The biggest example of this, of course, is the assassination of his father, Emperor Varus. When Zenos regains his body at the end of Shadowbringers, he has only one goal. He wants to confront his friend, the Warrior of Light, for a spectacular rematch, the greatest battle the world has ever known. His father, Emperor Varus, is an obstacle to this, as the Warrior of Light and company are too preoccupied dealing with Garlemald to truly focus on Zenos. This means to Zenos there is only one action to take: killing his father. His father initially thinks that his son has assassinated him in order to claim the throne in an act of patricide, which would be the logical assumption. It's not what drives Zenos, though, and Zenos says as much.
'Tis you, father, who have struggled with this burden. Simply holding the Empire together has occupied your limited faculties. But you may take comfort in knowing that I have no intention of pursuing your tedious agenda. Nor am I interested in ruling over the Empire's lands. I came only to remove that which ruins my sport. I will not have my prey stolen by your petty wars and cowardly weapons.
You would kill me just for that.
I need no other reason. Any and all who interfere with my hunt will not do so twice!
I love the horror Varys has when he realizes his son has killed him for such a petty reason. Worse yet, that his son will go on to shirk his duty to the throne, an action which plunges Garlemald into civil war and eventually causes the Empire to collapse. A story where all of the characters have motivations as simple as Zenos is a bad story, but a story where everyone is driven by complex emotional and political motivations that's built this Gordian knot of relationships and politics and complicated history spanning hundreds of years, and then you have this one character who cuts through that knot. That's an interesting approach. It's like dropping Michael Myers into the world of Game of Thrones, and then seeing how Cersei, Tyrion, or Daenerys would respond to that. By the time Zenos is introduced to us, he's already the most powerful warrior in all of Garlemald, perhaps the world. In the video I made about Garlemald, I refer to Zenos as a Goku-type figure, and I stand by that, but I specifically think he's an interesting deconstruction of the trope. What would happen if Goku actually became the most powerful? Goku's goal is always to become stronger, so what if he really was the strongest and there was never a Vegeta or a Frieza or a Cell or a Buu to show up and keep escalating the challenge? Where would he go from there? I don't think Goku would become as cruel or corrupt as Zenos is, but it's not hard to imagine him being every bit as bored with life itself. Why does power creep exist in anime? Why do we go from Vegeta to Frieza to Cell to Buu? This trope serves two purposes in a long-running story. The first is to give the characters an adversarial force, something always stronger than they are to strive to overcome, and the second is to always give the characters a sense of progression. Zenos has been robbed of both of these things, and they were what he found meaning in. Growing stronger and defeating more powerful threats. Zenos doesn't have a single concrete goal, he just has the broad and vague goal of being stronger. Zenos' lack of a coherent personal philosophy, of a single concrete goal he's striving for throughout the entire story, is actually kind of refreshing because it's honest. Very few people in real life are about something. That's not how people work. Very few people have a single goal they spend their whole lives striving for, a singular cause they are dedicated to. Those who are usually aren't people I'd say we should strive to be like. There's value in being well-rounded, and those who build their entire identities around a single hobby, or around their politics, or around any one thing, are usually not very fun at parties. The flip side of this, though, is that it can be very hard to pin down what Zenos' story is about. Is it about anything? Does Zenos even have an arc? And if not, is that a problem? I think most people agree that Zenos after Stormblood is a far more compelling character than Zenos during Stormblood was. The Zenos we see once he returns is a lot more hopeless, a lot more bitter than the one we saw in Stormblood. Part of what makes his return more interesting is that the game itself now seems interested in the very complaint so many people have with Zenos, the simplicity of the character, and his motivations. Really, the only hint of this we get in his original appearance in Stormblood is this line from Lys at the end.
Is that what this was all about? All the meaningless death and destruction, so you could feel something?
Meaningless. Men die that others may live. Those who survive are stronger for it.
Take note of how Zenos is not being smug or mocking Lys here. He literally does not seem to understand where Lys is coming from. They are approaching this moment from such dramatically different perspectives that they aren't really even having the same conversation. The thing is, Zenos isn't completely wrong in an objective sense. His disregard for life is vile, but you can understand his perspective, especially with the framework of that short story in place. The dead do not learn, they sleep. Zenos believes that existence is only given meaning by struggle, and that those who cannot defend themselves are therefore meaningless. If to live is to suffer, then Zenos thinks it follows that to suffer is to live. This is Zenos' gift. It is the gift which was given to him by his tutor years ago, and it is a gift which he gives to the one he deems worthy, his friend, you. This is the understanding we need in order to talk about my favorite scene with Zenos in the entire game, one which comes during the Garlean interlude after you've returned from Elpis and before you head back to Labyrinthos and onward to Ultima Thule. The interaction with Zenos here begins like most of your other interactions with him in Endwalker up to this point. He shows up, he taunts you, saying he's prepared for a rematch, and Alice speaks for the player by being openly annoyed.
Oh, for the love of... You cannot still be on about a rematch.
The conversation takes a turn when Iolaus speaks. Iolaus was a loyal Imperial soldier up to and after the end of Garlemald. Now he sees his prince, who he has surely never met before and probably only knows through propaganda, for who he really is.
That's it. That's all you care about. Garlemald is in ruins. Our homeland, the nation you rule, is as good as gone. Along with so many of its people. Not just soldiers like us, not only those who fought and killed for power and duty. Innocent civilians. Murdered by their own flesh and blood. Lost and confused as they breathed their last. While we who survived with our lives and minds intact were left to freeze to death. The Eorzeans tell me all this was your doing! You slaughtered your countrymen! You did! For what?
For nothing, in the end. So much wasted effort.
You bastard!
That monologue by Iolaus is great. It's an amazing moment getting to see an average Garlean soldier have their view of the Crown Prince built exclusively by a lifetime of propaganda shattered like this. But the moment I truly love is Zenos' response here.
Would you be happier had I a good reason?
What?
If my motives met with your approval, would you no longer resent the outcome? If so, then perhaps a beast's skin would suit you better.
I like Iolaus. Despite his relatively small amount of screen time, he's quickly become one of my favorite members of the game's supporting cast. I sympathize with Iolaus in this scene, don't get it twisted, but what Zenos is saying here is true. It cuts so many of the characters in this game, so many of the monstrous actions by them, to the quick. What Zenos is refuting here is a ends justify the means position, the sort of argument that is used to justify monstrous actions all the time, both in fiction and real life. He's not refuting it from a position of moral superiority, though. Rather, he's saying that those with good reasons are no less monstrous than he is, just because their motivations are more complicated.
Duty, honor, morality. All constructs of convenience when put to proof. Surely the war taught you how easily power becomes the tool of the self-righteous. How the people's justice was merely a means to their ends. Yet you would ask me why. Ask any creature of this star and those above for answers, and they will tell you what suits their fancy.
The things Zenos has done are terrible. He knows this. He isn't going to pretend otherwise. When Iolaus is indignant over not only the things Zenos has done, but the reasons behind them being petty, he is implicitly saying that there are some motivations which would have justified these things. Death of women, children, innocent civilians, indiscriminate violence, and a complete disregard for human life. What kind of motivations would justify such a thing? If these acts were all for the greater good, as Iolaus sees it, as Garlemald saw it, would they be less monstrous? No. Those who say that they would, that these things are justifiable, are not the ones suffering from them. If these things had happened to Iolaus's enemies, and not his own family, would he have the same reaction? If Iolaus only cares about monstrous actions when he does not agree with the ends they are being committed in the name of, then is he any better than Zenos either? Zenos strips away all of the pretense of violence, of war. These are monstrous things, and Zenos accepts that he is a monster. What Iolaus is saying here is the exact complaint so many players have about Zenos, his simplicity. Zenos directly refutes the idea that any of the other villains we faced, Gaius, Varus, Elidibus, Emet-Selch, are better than he is just because we are able to sympathize with their motivations. For all his flaws, Zenos is honest. He does not pretend to be something he is not, does not attempt to justify his actions through sophistry. That's a really interesting rebuttal to the very complaint players had with him in Stormblood, and recontextualizes him as a deconstruction of the sympathetic villain trope. But, of course, just because Zenos is without the pretense of the other villains in the game, it doesn't mean he's forgiven for his actions. This exchange ends with Alisaie firing back.
Zenos! Perhaps you found meaning in living this way. I cannot deny you found strength. Yet if you only pursue your hedonistic pleasures and pay no heed to the plight of others, then no one will give you the time of day. You will never get what you want, not even the battle you pine for so dearly. You'll be alone for an eternity, and you'll deserve every agonizing second of it.
This is another truly wonderful piece of writing. Finally, Zenos and one of the Scions are not talking past each other. Zenos will not change who he is, but by telling Zenos that his actions will deny him exactly what he seeks, Alisaie has finally gotten through to Zenos. Of all the times we see people condemn Zenos, this line, "You will never get what you want, not even the battle you pine for so dearly," is the only time we see these condemnations get through to Zenos. It does, I think, change him, change his motivations. We see how these words have stuck with him when he quotes them himself later on back at the Royal Menagerie, where your climactic battle at the end of Stormblood took place. This is a change in his motivations. The core of who Zenos is does not change. He is not convinced that his worldview is wrong, that life is more valuable than he once believed it to be, but he does finally attempt to understand the motivations and the plight of others, even if only for his own selfish reasons. I'm glad this story doesn't end with Zenos learning his lesson and finally realizing the error of his ways, because for Zenos, that would have rung hollow. Endwalker is very concerned with this question of meaning, what gives life meaning, and finding meaning in the struggle. Zenos is, and ever has been, the dark extreme of this concept, and so this story works perfectly within Endwalker as a larger work. The change that happens here is not Zenos finding his own meaning elsewhere. Zenos chooses to stand with you against the Endsinger, an avatar of nihilism, despite being a very nihilistic character himself, because what Zenos finally seems to understand is that his source of meaning is not the only one that exists. He finally approaches you as the friend he claims to be, stands with you against the very calamity he helped create, and it is only together that you are able to walk away victorious. Zenos, despite his own inner turmoil, is standing against despair. This is one of the very few times, maybe the only time, we see Zenos fight for a reason other than seeking a challenge. Medion, the Endsinger, is not his prey. It is yours. He is helping you because he is your friend. Then you defeat Medion. The story of Endwalker is concluded. This is when your rematch with Zenos finally takes place. Elise was right. It was not until Zenos concerned himself with the plight of another, with your plight, that he got what he wanted. Now the two of you stand face to face, and Zenos gives you a choice.
And so I come before you, to issue challenge, and offer singular bliss. If you wish to walk away, I will not stop you.
This presentation, the fact that Zenos is giving you a choice here, is essential. This is what finally completes his character arc. He comes to you as a friend. He offers his gift. He does not demand you take it. It is only in doing so that he finally gets the fight he so desired. Where this is hopelessly flubbed is that the game doesn't actually give you a choice to skip that final Zenos fight. That's really unfortunate, because while I think the right choice is to fight Zenos here, that it is the narratively satisfying conclusion, the fact that you can't refuse him robs the scene of its meaning. I really, really wish they had given the player the chance to refuse Zenos here, because while I would never pick to skip it myself, choosing to give Zenos what he wants here, choosing to embrace him as your friend, is only meaningful if the ability to refuse him also exists. Of course, there's another angle to the scene, and I think it is this other angle that led to the decision to make the fight mandatory. Endwalker is a very meta expansion. Whether it's Venat asking the player if their journey was worth it, Emet-Selch teasing other places the game can go in the future, or the meta-commentary aspects of Zenos' storyline, You can tell that this expansion, serving as something of an ending for the story the game has been telling so far, brought up questions of why we play MMOs to the minds of the writers. Zenos draws comparison between his own actions and motivations and the actions and motivations of the Warrior of Light, really of any MMO player character, and by proxy, player. That doesn't just happen here. We can see this be stated almost explicitly in the Garlemald section earlier.
Does the pursuit of prey you have bested before excite you? Of course not. Absent the challenge, the thrill, your prize is a hollow victory. Butchery.
I view this line as a meta-comment about farming content in an MMO. Farming a raid boss hardly has the same impact that taking it down the first time did. Of course, the part everyone remembers from a meta angle is at the very end.
You mean to return to the world where you are hailed as a hero. Hear me then. Not as a hero, but as simply you. You value life. You do not burn yours save for reasons you deem worthy. Reasons such as those which brought you here. The salvation of a world and its people. The motives of a hero true. But there is more to you than that. You know this to be true. As surely as you know the thrill of pushing your body and soul to their limits. Of confronting ever mightier foes, dancing ever closer to the precipice, wondering if this will be the one to finally fill the void. Such pleasures you seek for their own sake, and no other reason. Is this not so, adventurer?
Confronting ever mightier foes, dancing ever closer to the precipice, wondering if this will be the one to finally fill the void. Zenos is describing playing an MMO. Zenos isn't talking to the Warrior of Light here, the player character. Zenos is talking to the player. When he says, "Hear me then, not as a hero, but as simply you," the creators of the game are saying that this is being said to the person sitting in front of a computer monitor or TV screen, not the person standing in a blue void of Dynamis. He's right. The Warrior of Light has many reasons for doing what they do, for stopping Meteon, for fighting Hades or Nidhogg or Alexander or any other enemy. The player, however, has, at the point they'll see this dialogue, spent hundreds of hours of their own real life going on this same adventure, and we don't have those reasons. If we don't stop Emmett Selk's machinations, no one in our life is going to die. The world won't end. So then why did we spend so much time leveling, raiding, and engaging with this long-form storytelling? Such pleasures you seek for their own sake, and no other reason. I don't know about you, but that I can't deny.
Ha! Acceptance! At long last! The conflagration of our clash will scorch even the stars!
Not So Different You and I is a pretty tired trope, but I haven't seen it used to draw comparison between a villain and the viewer like this before. It's effective, this magic trick of shifting the context of conversation from one between villain and hero to one between developer and player. It works for me. This is why, even if the option were there, I'd never turn this final fight with Zenos down. I, the player, want to send this character off with a fitting battle. That's why I'm here. It's the narratively satisfying conclusion, and the mechanically satisfying one. Still, that should be a question each player gets to answer for themselves, and I think it robs it of a lot of the punch having this battle be mandatory. It is a glorious battle, though. A spectacle. A fitting end for Zenos. Then, quiet. A moment to breathe before the end. Zenos got his wish. His candle burned as brightly as a star for just a moment, and then it was over. This is the end for Zenos. A final goodbye to our friend. Did Zenos find meaning in the end? Meaning in this combat? His final words ask this question.
Was this life a gift or a burden? Did you find fulfillment?
We don't get to hear Zenos' answer to this question, as he breathes his last. Now, for the love of God, don't bring him back again. I began this video by talking about an episode of Community where Abed tries to solve the question of whether Nicolas Cage is good or bad. In the end, Abed cannot find a single concrete answer to the question because it is not a question that can be boiled down into a binary. At first, this causes Abed to go through a crisis of faith. As he puts it, film was his religion, and seeing it shattered like this changes his entire worldview. People are random and pointless, he says. Shirley helps Abed work through this by framing it in the context of her own religion. You can't understand and categorize every little thing. Nicolas Cage works in mysterious ways. Nicolas Cage is not good or bad, he's good and bad. As Abed puts it, that's why critics can call him a genius or an idiot and be right no matter what. I do not have an answer for whether Zenos yae Galvus is a good character or a bad character. I think trying to answer that question in such a binary way is pointless. As you might have guessed from what I've said in this video, Zenos is ultimately a character whose story I enjoyed, and I think the game is better off for his inclusion in it. But Zenos is also a frustrating character, because there's a lot of mistakes made with this character along the way. The things that are bad have good to them, like the character's simplicity. The things that are good have bad to them, like essential backstory being exclusive to a hardcover short story collection. I'm glad they brought Zenos back, because what they do with him in Endwalker does have more impact, more staying power, and I think makes what we saw in Stormblood more interesting in hindsight. That said, if they bring Zenos back again, I reserve all rights to change my mind on Zenos again and think he's a terrible character and always was. I don't actually think they're going to bring Zenos back again. I think we're truly done with him now, but The fact that I have to even say that at all, the fact that I'm not 100% sure, and the fact that others aren't 100% sure, really brings up the issue with bringing the character back like this in the first place. It feels like there's this heavily weighted asterisk at the end of every discussion about the character. An asterisk that says, at least so far. Even though I do like what they do with Zenos in Endwalker, and even though I think they largely redeemed the character in my eyes, part of me wonders whether it was really worth bringing him back in the first place, instead of coming up with a new character without the baggage Zenos brought with him. Would they have been able to hit these same beats with a brand new character? I like Stormblood more now, having played Endwalker, because of what they did with Garlemald there. I like Zenos' appearances in Stormblood more now, having read a short story published years later and played content to expansions later. Is that good writing because it fixes a broken story, or is it bad writing because they didn't know when to just move on? Most players going through Stormblood for the first time now are going to have much the same experience I had with it, finding Zenos boring initially. Worse even, because they'll see all of those fights and resurrections and teases much more quickly playing the expansions back to back to back. Although I do not have a single concrete thesis for what Zenos is about, although I do not have a single one-word answer for whether Zenos is good or bad, I am walking away from this essay satisfied with my feelings on Zenos. My feelings on Zenos are messy and complicated because Zenos is messy and complicated. The people who hate Zenos are right. He's terrible. The people who love Zenos are right. He's fantastic. Maybe this is the centrist argument, but I'm not saying the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I'm saying both of these things are true simultaneously. I think we have this urge to treat stories and elements of stories as either good or bad, like it's a math equation. If there's more good than bad in a story, then it's a good story, and if there's more bad than good in a story, then it's a bad story. I think this is a really bad way to view storytelling, to try to break it down in a very mechanical, very binary way. The things that are good about Zenos are good. The things that are bad about Zenos are bad. Neither of these statements detracts from the truth of the other. He's a messy character with a messy story, and I think that's why he's so love him or hate him. I'm glad this story was told. I'm glad they chose to bring him back in Endwalker. While it's brought me close to madness a few times, it has given me a lot to think about, and I enjoyed the ride. At the end of the day, that is a pleasure worth seeking for its own sake. That is a story I'm glad I experienced, and a character I'll remember fondly. So that's the end of the video essay. I just wanted to say to everyone who's made it this far, thank you for watching all the way through to the end. It's a long video, so really I appreciate it when people make it all the way through. I'm recording this off the cuff, just without a script, because I'm releasing this video on March 14th of 2023, and the reason that's significant is because it's actually the 2-year anniversary of me releasing videos on YouTube. It was March 14th, 2021, when I released that first Hitman video, and the growth this channel has seen in the past year has been absolutely staggering, especially in the past 2 months. A year ago, I wasn't even at 100 subscribers, and now I've just passed 10,000. And 2 months ago, before I released the Fear and Hunger video, I had only just hit 1,000 subscribers. It was actually my goal to see if this channel could hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and here we are in early March at the time I'm recording this, and I've made it. So it's been really, really incredible to see, and I really do want to say thank you. I also just want to say, if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more content like this, it really does help me a lot if you leave a like, if you comment, and if you subscribe. I know you've seen YouTube videos before, so you already know all of that, but it really does help. and you might want to subscribe if you liked this video, if you like this kind of content. Because while Final Fantasy XIV isn't the only focus of this channel, I do really like making these videos, and I have plans on continuing to make these videos in the future every few months. I think the next one I'm going to make is going to be an Emmett Selk video, because he's my favorite character in the game, and it's kind of crazy that I haven't gotten to him yet, and that I've gotten to characters who I do like Fandaniel and like Zenos before him. So if you want to see that at some point in the future, as well as some other fun stuff that I've got in the more immediate horizon, then yeah, hang around. I'd appreciate it, and I hope you'll enjoy my future videos. Thank you so much just for making it this far, even if you don't subscribe, though. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the video.